So here we have a XB2, Xray XB2 gear diff all laid out, and we're going to build this up. It's pretty much the same process for most of the gear diffs. They all pretty much work on the same principle. We've got all the items here. The first thing you want to make sure on is when you look at the plastic parts, particularly the gears, because they come out of these sprues, make sure there's no burrs on them, particularly around here. If there is, then you just need to take them off, otherwise your gearbox or your diff will not run smooth. That is very important. But the quality of parts now, it's very rarely a problem. They just break off these sprues and it's not really a problem. So our first step is to put the O-ring into here. Now this provides the seal. Now in the manual it recommends using a little bit of oil. What I like to use whenever I'm seating O-rings is Team Associated, do a green slime. Not much of it, just a small amount of it on the O-ring I find just helps seat it. Not much at all. Just smear that round. And that just goes in there. The next task is you need to pass this through there. Now to do that, they recommend put a little bit of oil on there. We'll use the diff oil. And it's important when you do this that you put some oil on here, because otherwise you will scratch the O-ring that we've just put in. And if you do that, then you'll always get a leaking diff. And it's the same when you do your shock absorber as well. So just pass that through there. Like that. Then we have this washer to go on there like there. The next stage is we just need to put this pin through there. Like so. And then the diff gear just sits on there. You see there's a groove on the back of it, which sits on there like that. Just check that moves around freely. So then we move on to this stage. Again, just check there's no burrs on that. I've already just put the rubber in there, and I've used again this green slime just to seat it. Pass the axle through. Again, we'll just put a little bit of oil on that. Washer then goes on the back like so. Make sure that's pushed all the way down. Now getting the pin in here is slightly more tricky, because you've got more depth. What you need to do, you need to make sure you line it up into one of those recesses there. There we go, just have to do that off camera, make it a bit easier. And then here we have our gear. Check there's no burrs on it, which there isn't. And that then just pushes on there. And that spins around nicely like that. We then have our smaller gears. Now you can run 2 gears or 4 gears. If you run 2 gears, you'll need to change the oil more often. I'm going to build it up as per the book with 4 gears. Very simple process this. Each gear just goes on there like that with one of these washers on the side. So what we do now, we need to locate this set of gears into here. Now you can see the cross pins locate into there like that, and that is pretty much the diff built up. We just now got to fill it with oil. Now in the manual it gives you a particular weight. This apparently should weigh, certainly in the Xray manual, they're telling me this weighs 11.92 grams, and I've got to put 1.3 grams of oil in it. So we'll weigh that up off camera and see where that ends up. Generally I've found if you just cover the cross pins, that's usually about right. Weighing it is obviously very accurate, but when you rebuild this diff, of course it will still never get it completely dry unless you really clean it well. So you're never going to have a base weight to work from. So it's handy to know by eye how much you need to put in. So we've filled the diff with oil. We're happy with that. As you can see, it's just about covered the diff pins or the cross pin in there. You'll find when you fill it up, it does crown a bit in the middle, but once you work, you can work it round by turning the output shaft, and it will drop down. And it will drop down once the diff starts to work anyway. Now, simple process now of just closing the diff case up. We've got the paper gasket. As you can see, it actually comes, this one comes without the holes pushed out. They are punched, just not pushed out, so we just need to remove them. Make sure that doesn't disappear into my diff, because that will affect the performance. And make sure you don't tear this. If you tear this, it's game over really. And if you get a problem with your diff leaking, the chances are the problems will be this paper gasket or your plastic parts, particularly probably this part. You probably either over tightened it and deformed it. So that's usually the problem. So we put the diff top on like that. I'm just going to hold it tight and just work it. That feels nice and smooth. And then we've got these 1.5mm bolts to tighten up and close the diff case up. When you tighten these up, you want to tighten them up in a cross pattern and don't over tighten them. And that is one diff built up. You can work it fit, it feels nice and smooth. And that is job done. We'll just put the bearings on, and that's going to be ready to go in the car in the next steps. So thanks for watching, stay tuned. So here we have the transmission assembly stage. We've already got the diff built up from the previous step, and on this model we have the triple plate slipper set up. We've also got our diff inserts there, which I've still got to just remove from the sprues. So the first step is to take our transmission side. This is the side where the slipper actually, or the spur gear, mounts onto. So step number 1 is to take our top lay shaft, and it's actually got 2 different size bearings on this. So we put the larger one on there, and that just passes through. You can see it's the blue seal bearing on there. We then have our intermediate gear, which has a bearing that pushes into each side of it, pushed in like so. And then we have the shaft, which that goes on like so, and that then goes in there like so. And there you can see, start to see how the gearbox goes together. We can then put the other bearing on there, and we can close up the diff casing. It is that simple. Just close it up like that. Just feel, is it free? Any burrs? Does it feel smooth? Yep, that's fine. Haven't put any lubrication on these gears as yet. I will do that just when I put the diff gear in. And then we just close it up with 3 of these screws, which go in there, there, and there. Just tighten them up. So there we have our diff all screwed up. 12mm bolts that went in there. I'm just going to remove, I'm going to use the 3 dot locations for the diff mountings. Make sure that you always have the same number each side. You see they've got a little dot mark on them. There, that's got 3 dots on it. And as you can see on this one, we've got a small burr there. I don't know if you can see it on camera, perhaps you can't. But basically, just a small knife, scalpel, just to take them off, just so there's no burr on there whatsoever. And that's a simple case of putting the diff in. These go on that way. I am going to mount the diff high, 3 dot high, which is a sort of the standard setting for carpet. You always want to try and aim to have your drive shafts level. So you see that goes in there, you've got the 3 dots there, and the 3 dots there. Just feel it. That feels nice. And before I put this case on, I'm just going to put some of the black grease in here, just to help that diff. Doesn't need to be too much. Just work that in there. Feel that go. Perhaps put a little bit more in there. And that will, once you've used that for a couple of laps, that will then spin round in the gearbox there and keep it nice and quiet and smooth. Last step for this is to just click on the top. You'll hear it just click, and then we have 2 10mm bolts which go in here. There we go. We've just snugged those bolts up just tight. Feel if that's smooth, that's lovely and silky smooth. If there's a tight spot, you need to take it out and check what it is. It might be a burr on something, or you've over tightened something. You don't need to crank these up super tight, just tight enough so that they're snug. So the next little step is just to mount our spur gear protector onto our motor plate, and it's as simple as just placing it on there, and then it screws in from the rear. Now, it doesn't say in the manual, but I have just off screen put a small dab of thread lock in there. Whenever I go into metal like this, I prefer just to put a small dab of thread lock on, and it's not that easy to get these. Once you've got this mounted on the spur gear, and you can't always get to these that easy from memory. So we then need to mount this onto there. Very simple process. Mounts on there just like that, and then you've got 3 countersunk 2mm screws which go in there like that. So here we go, we've got the motor plate mounted. Now it's just a simple case of mounting the slipper assembly. This is a triple pad slipper. You can get double pads or even slipper eliminators, which is used mainly in stock racing. The first step, you have this plate which has got sleeves on both sides. The oval side faces out, so you put that on. Turn it around so you feel it goes home. You then have a pad on, then the spur gear. You need to make sure, in fact I'm going to go and put the pad into the spur gear. You need to make sure you get the spur gear the right way round. It's got a deeper recess on one side than the other. I don't know if you can see that. That's the shallow recess. That goes towards the gearbox. So I'm going to put that on there. Feel that go home, and just look on the back and just make sure it's seated into your spur gear recess. You can see it has. We then put on another slipper pad. This is the intermediate plate, which is square, so make sure that sits home on there like that. Another pad on there. So we've got that assembly on. Then you have the final plate. Again, notice the flat side goes towards the gearbox. Spring on. Stepped washer on. The step goes away from the spur gear. And then, no, that's wrong. The step actually goes into the spring, so it seats. Apologies on that. And then that on there, 7mm spanner, and we'll do that up. My initial setting is I will leave that flush with the end. I will do that up and leave that flush with the end of the shaft, and then I'll tune it when it's on the track. So that is the gearbox done and ready to go on the car. Just a side note, just make sure when you are putting your slipper together that all these pads have located properly. Make sure that, as I said earlier in the video, that the slipper pads not come off the back there, and that the 2 front ones have located properly there. That centre metal pad has located properly, and also this outer one, because actually off camera, when I was just looking at it, it hadn't actually located properly. So make sure that has located properly. Okay, thanks for watching. So we've now got the assembly of the rear suspension. Got the parts here, the gearbox we've already made up, the chassis, and this is the main difference, one of the main differences on this car. The actual rear pivot block basically goes on there rather than mounting on the chassis like it did on the old one. So the first step is to mount the front block on the chassis there. Now what you do have to do, you've got these little inserts which, if you're familiar with off-road racing, you'll know that these are used on most of the cars now to adjust the tow-in, anti-squat, etc. on the rear of the car. You get loads of these different ones. You get them on a sprue like this. I'm just going to go with the kit setting, which is this one in the bottom right hand corner. So we'll just put that in there, and then we will fix this to the chassis. As we're going metal into metal, we do need to use a little bit of thread lock, otherwise they are likely to come undone. And to make sure you don't get these two mixed up, the front one is the narrower one and the rear one has Xray on the back. So we'll fit that on there with 8mm countersunk screws, and say a little bit of thread lock on there as well. So we have that on there now, and the next step is to mount the gearbox, sorry, the shock tower to the back of the gearbox. Now it mounts on there like that. This is the previous video. We actually done the sealing of the tower, so that is all nice and good, and that's all good and strong. So now we've got 2 lengths of screws. The longer ones go in the bottom because they actually encapsulate the gearbox top into the main gearbox housing. So you've got two longer ones at the bottom and then two shorter ones at the top. So we've mounted the shock tower on there, and the next step is to mount the wing mounts. You've got three positions for these to go. You've got high, medium and low, so you can put them whichever position you want depending on your setup preference. I'm going to mount it in the middle position, and then we've got four 10mm, I think they are, 10mm screws just to snug them up. And again, this part here has pretty much been the same on most XB2s for quite a few variations. It's always worth every stage just checking when you've done anything to the gearbox that it still runs free and that's nice and free. Next step, we've got to mount it onto the chassis. Now there are 6 screw points where it mounts on. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we use 8mm countersunk bolts for that. There's no need to thread lock these because these are going into the plastic of the gearbox. So there we have gearbox securely mounted on the chassis there again, still running nice and free. Now our next stage is to mount the arms. Now what you will notice on these arms, they give you a little washer on there which you just need to break off. Comes off nice and easy. It's left a little bit of a burr on there, so we'll just clean it up with a scalpel. Like that. Marked on it, left and right, so obviously know that's the right. So we've got right and left arms, took the bushes off, and these are one of the things that these are different compared to the dirt bug. You have different rear arms, can change the rear weight distribution of the car. So the pivot pin just goes into our insert, or our pill as they get called. Put the other one in as well. And put our arm on, put our other arm on, spacer, spacer. We then have to put our pills into this. I won't go into all the setup features of the pills, you can have a look at that yourself. And then that just goes on there. Like so. So we then get that mounted onto there. Check your arms move freely. That was a fraction, no, that's okay. Then we have screws go through here, but we have a 2mm spacer which has to go into there, which will obviously adjust the anti-squat of the car, and we have another one to go in the other side. So we just nip those screws up. So there we have our rear suspension, or the rear transmission and the suspension attached to the chassis. You need to make sure these arms move up and down nice and freely. If they don't, you might just need to just remount these arms. You can get the reamers which are the perfect size just to free them up. They're not too bad. Possibly may have a look at them, but they're not too bad. So there we go. That's that stage done. We're going to have the drive shafts and hub assembly step. First things first is we're going to assemble the drive shaft. Now, it's always a good idea to use a little bit of the black grease on this little insert here. Doesn't need to be much, just a small amount to help that rotate around in there. Just like that. We then put it onto the axle, and then this pin, which is the same one as what goes in to hold the hex on, and you'll see you've got a spare set of holes there, so when this starts to wear you can use another set of holes. And to stop this coming out, it's a simple process, it's just encapsulated by the wheel hub bearing. So that then goes on to the wheel hub, get the right way around, pushes into there like that, and then we've got a black shielded bearing to go on the outside. Another pin which goes through the axle. Then this goes on here, which is the drive hex. You've got loads of different options here on it, adjust the width of the track of the car. And then finally, that screw just goes in there just to keep that on there tight. So there is our completed axle. The next step, what we've got to do, we've got to put the inserts in here, similar to on the wishbone mountings. There's different options. At the moment, we are just going to go for the center mount, just completely in the center. You've got about 9 different options here, which adjusts the height of your axle and also affects the track width as well. So put one of them on each side, and I've just dropped one. I'll just find that. So the next step is we need to mount the top link mounting point. Now, as you can see, that's got a slight chamfer on it there, so it goes on that way. We put a little 2mm spacer in there. Again, that's a tuning point where you can adjust the length of that distance by putting extra spacers in there, and it adjusts the roll center, just a few things on the car. So we'll just screw that onto there, and I'm just going to put, because it's metal into metal, I'm just going to put a small amount of thread lock on there. And here we have the 2 complete sides. I've done the other side as well, exactly the same. They're not handed, they are exactly the same, so you can swap them from side to side if need be. So they are ready to go on the car. We just need to make the turnbuckles up and then fix it onto the car. So here we have the hub carriers ready to go on the car. What I've done, I've made up the top link mounts. One of the worst jobs, I think, when you're making a car up, but we've done them. Little tip, what I always do is when you're making these up, screw them on all the way past the length they're meant to be, so shorter than the length that they're meant to be. Then when you need to come to adjust them on the car, it's easier. You're not trying to cut into a new bit of thread on the ball stud. So that's what I would do on that. But it's quite a simple process now of just putting these bits on the car. The first job we're going to do is we are going to put the ball stud onto here. Now you have these little conical washers, as you can see. They've got a slight shoulder on them. So that one goes at the top. That basically gives when the ball socket is on the stud, it gives it clearance. So it makes it easier. There's no way of binding up. So that just goes on there like that. Nip that up, nice and snug. Then we will put that on there. So now we've got to mount that into here. You have these spacers, which basically adjust where this goes in that gap there, so you can adjust your wheelbase effectively. For the kit setting, I am going to go with the shorter wheelbase option. Put the spacers on there like that. And then your hub carrier should just slot on there like that. You then need to put one of these screws in each side of here, which stops, that basically stops the pin falling out. Some cars have grub screws in the axle there. In fact, the older version of the Xray did, but they now use these little screws which just go in here like that, and you then have the same on the other side. So we then put another one on there. So we've got both our hub carriers on. We've got the drive shafts mounted in. Now the next stage is to mount our top link mount. If you've got a roll bar, which I think the dirt kit comes with, this is a carpet kit, doesn't come with one, your roll bar goes through there and then it mounts onto the wishbones there, but we haven't got that. Now this is one bit I probably will be upgrading. I have got some alloy versions of this product, of this top link mount, but for the purposes of doing this, obviously I won't bother. And then basically all you've got is then you've just got these 2 screws here. Sorry, 2 screws at the front, which just lock down there as you go all the way down into the bottom of the gearbox. You want to make sure when you've done these up that it is nice and free, that your gearbox is still free. And similarly, these ball studs here, make sure you've got the right lengths of those. The dirt model comes with longer ones that go on here, but the carpet one has same lengths both sides. So we've snugged those screws up, and then our last task for here is to put on the ball studs for the inner. Now you've got those conical washers again. You can see you've got the conical washer goes on top, and you've got 2mm spacer that goes underneath. This is the kit setting again, and it's telling me to put them on the inside. So we'll put that on there. In all honesty, this bit is really slightly in the way of getting these in, but they will go in okay. We could have obviously put them on before we put that top link on. And we'll just do the other side. Exactly the same. So we snugged up those bolts, and we have just got to put the top links on. Now you normally use some ball link pliers, but I haven't actually got them to hand, so I'm just going to use some normal some normal needle nose pliers. And that is our rear suspension done. Make sure it falls down under its own weight. That side does. That side's a little bit tight, so we'll just have a look at that. We'll just check to see whether it's actually the top links that are tight or whether it's those bottom links. In fact, in a run or two it may loosen itself off, but we'll have a look at that and just make sure that's how it should be, not like that. Thanks for watching. Be another video soon. So in this video we're going to look at the chassis rails and also the steering assembly, which I was going to lay out there but I haven't done that yet. We'll do that in the next stage. This is a very straightforward step, so I don't think we need to talk too much about this. Only thing to do is make sure you get the right size bolts. They're 8mm are the shorter ones, and I think they're 16 or 18 the longer ones for the front that goes through these bulkheads. So just a case of screwing these in. It's really not complicated, this bit. Just make sure you get the chassis rails the right way around. They are handed. So we've screwed on these chassis rails. We will then put on the front bulkhead. First of all, we will screw through these three, which again are 8mm countersunks. So we've put on the front lower bulkhead. We can then put the carbon fibre braces on. You can leave some of these screws out, which adjusts the flex characteristics of the car, but as we're just building it as kit at the moment, we will just put all the screws in. So you have 3 shorter ones there. We'll just start them off on each side. And then this part just has got some bosses there which sit into there, nice and snug. And then you have 2 of the longer bolts which go all the way through there and up into that bit to secure it. So we have mounted all these bits all ready to go, and I've now laid out the items for the steering. Nice to see, as with most of the top kits now, they do come with all ball bearings or ball races. There's no horrible bushings involved, so that's good. The only real difference is if this orientates slightly differently for the dirt version. There's no different parts. There's a slightly different spacer, but all the parts are in the kit. The older X-Rays had different parts here for dirt and carpet versions, but I'm going to build it up as per the carpet spec. So the first thing, I'm actually just going to put all these ball races into the arms. You can get alloy arms for these, and that might well be an upgrade that I will look to transfer from one of my older cars. So just pop those ball races in, and what we'll do now is we will put this together if I don't throw the bits everywhere. So you've got one of these 1mm shims that goes on first, then it passes through the arm, another 1mm shim on the top, and it then mounts into the furthest back arm hole. Sorry. Again, this is being built up as a dirt spec, and what they're suggesting now in the manual is to tighten this up fully, or nice and tight like that, and then loosen it off 1/3 of a turn, so it's nice and free. There we go, that's good, nice and free, and there's not much. I'm going to tighten up a fraction more. As long as it's free, that's the main thing. You don't want it to bind up. And then we just do exactly the same with the other side. So we've snugged them up. As you can see, you need to make sure you do them up tight enough so it pulls the bearings in tight. And then, as I say, just back it off 1/3 of a turn, so it's nice and free. The next thing is we put these sleeves through here. And what I have done, I've just put a small amount of thread lock on these because we're metal into metal. 2mm or 1.5mm. And then we tighten that into there. And again, feel that, does that turn okay? And we'll do the same with the other side. Didn't put much thread lock on these, just enough, just so they don't come undone. You just need to hold that bottom part just to stop it turning. That's those bits done. So we then need to mount this to the car. I've already actually put that through because it's a little bit fiddly to do on camera, but as you can see, they're a slight square. So you need to make sure you line them up properly so that they go through there. Now, this is your front bulkhead. I probably will be putting a brass one on here at some point, but for the sake of building the kit, we'll just go with standard. And then all it takes in there is two 10mm bolts to go on there. And they will just tighten up nice and snug. And there's our chassis rails on and our steering assembly on the front. Good time just to check that that feels nice and smooth. Thanks for watching the video. Hope it's been informative. And the next one we'll be looking at the front suspension. So here we're going to look at the front end suspension assembly. I've got one half of it laid out here. I've already done the unthanking task of putting turnbuckles together. Thought we'd do that straight away. That's easy enough to do. And I've just laid out the other wishbone here. So the first task is actually to put one of the retaining screws in here. So it's just a 1.5mm driver, and that just goes on there like that. So we just put those screws in there. They just stop the pins when they go in coming out from the back. Now, the wishbones on these front are handed, as are the rear ones, so you can't get them around the wrong way. They are labelled L and R on there, left and right, so they're easy enough to do. So we'll just put the front wishbones on. Pivot pins go in. Again, what you need to do is when these are assembling the front suspension, or when you're assembling any suspension, make sure it is free. Once you've got everything in, it's free. So that stage there, we know that they're free. And then we just put on the front brace, alloy part that is, front brace with two 8mm countersunk screws, which just go on the front there like so. So we put those two screws in there. The next thing we're going to put on is the front top link mount. Now this, you can get some alloy upgraded versions of these, and that's probably something I will look to put on this car, but for the moment we'll just put the standard one. So that just sits in there. Make sure you get the right way round. It comes with the slot to the back like that. I need to put it on the wrong way around. And then the front bumper goes underneath like that. And then you have two 16mm screws which go through from the bottom like that. So that's all snugged up there. It's all on there nice and tight. All good. So we'll look at the front axles now. I'll just show you one side. Now this is the right side. Now you just need to be careful. They have got a slight angle on them. If you can see, the flat goes to the inside. So where it's flat like that, it goes to the inside. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put the steering arm adapter on. Now this is where they do vary a little bit. The dirt version comes with a different one of these to the carpet. These have a what they call a 3 slot. If you can see the number of slots on there, and there is actually a slight error in the manual on these. It says in one page it says it comes with a 1 slot, and on the other page it says it comes with a 3 slot, but it does come with the 3 slot on these. And then we shall put the bearings in there. One pushes in one side, nothing more complicated than that. And that goes through there like that, and it feels nice and smooth. And once we've done that, we just need to put through or put the hex on. So it's just a case of putting the pin through the hole there like that. And then I've already put the little screw on there which holds that in. It's a case of pushing that on and then tightening down on that screw. Make sure it's clamped in tight. Have a feel. Does it spin okay? No excess movement. No, that's good. And we'll do the same now with the other side. So we've got these arms together. It's now a case of putting them in the steering blocks, yokes, whatever you want to call them. Now with this car, you've got these bushes. You have a thick bush and a thin bush. Now it depends on the setup of the car. You can put them in the thick one in the top or the bottom. It affects the handling of the car. Now they recommend putting the thick washer in the bottom for carpet and in the top for the dirt setup. So we're going to stick with the carpet setup. So it's just a case of putting it in like that, and then you have a 12mm screw top and bottom to hold it in place. And we'll tighten them up and then we'll do the other side. So we've snugged up those bolts. Just make sure, a little bit of play there, nothing to do about that, that's the way it's designed, and make sure it's nice and free. Now the next bit we need to do is to put the inserts. You've got these inserts that go in from the back, and they adjust the front caster. Now make sure you get these in the right way around. When they're sitting on the car, the additional casters make it lean back further than the wishbone, not forward. I'll show you that when it's on the car. So we just have the pin which goes forward, and we also have a 2mm spacer. Now this can go either in front of, if you can see, you can either go in front of the yoke or behind it to adjust the wheelbase, and we'll put it behind. And as you can see, I've actually got that in the wrong way around. It's making the car lean forward, so we need to swap that round. So we've now put both of these parts on. Again, just check we've got free movement. They're nice and free. And we've just then put the retaining screw there, which makes sure that pin doesn't fall out. And as you can see, I've now put the washer on the back there. And hopefully you can see that is now leaning back further than the angle of the wishbone. So that is on the right way around. So we put all the top links on here now. I've done both sides. Again, you've got these conical washers. Make sure you get them on the right way around, and make sure you put them on as per the manual. Slightly different to the manual instructions, I'm actually going to put the front bulkheads and shock towers on so I can actually get the shocks mounted in a stage. So you've got 4 12mm bolts that go in there, and then 2 10mm that go in the front here. You need to make sure you do get your length of the bolts correct, because if you do put longer ones in, they will cause you problems, and then we'll just nip those ones up. So we've got those bolts all on, and then the last step for this bit is just to put the tower on. Just need to make sure, obviously, you get your countersunk part of the plate the right way around, so these fit in there, and these are just 10mm 2mm head countersunk screws. So there we have the car, pretty much, apart from a few servo mounts and a few bits for the battery and the brace at the back here, pretty much ready to go for the shocks. So that is the next step, building and mounting the shock absorbers. So here we're on to building up the shock absorbers. I've just laid out one here. Haven't got the springs here laid out at the moment, but this is the main body and assembly of the shock absorber. You'll certainly get familiar with this if you do race off-road buggies, because you end up rebuilding these shocks very, very often to get the peak performance. So the first thing we're going to do is get the right piston off. Now they recommend putting 1.6 in here. You can see there is actually a number, sorry, 1.7 on the back. There is a number on there. It's probably not possible to see on camera, but there is a number on there. I always put that on the top of the shock, so when you take the top lid off the piston you can actually see it. So we just put the E-clip on, or C-clip, whatever you want to call them. So I always put them on so the number is on top, and then put the other C-clip on. So we've now got that assembly on there. Now this is one of the most important parts when you build these shocks. As I said on some of the other videos, when you remove these from the sprues, you sometimes have a small amount of like an offcut, not an offcut, but a burr, sorry. Now if you don't remove that, your shock, that won't even go in there. Just, it does, but it won't go in straight. So you need to make sure, just feel around this, and you'll feel a little sharp bit or a bump, and if you just use your scalpel just to take that off, and it should then go in the shock body perfectly smooth. If it doesn't go in smooth, you can always use some sandpaper just to run around it to make it smooth. Just deburred that. I always find it easier actually to put them on the shock shaft first because it's easier to hold. And you can see, I'll put it upside down. I can feel that's perfectly smooth on there, so that's that bit done. The next part is we are going to put the seals into the shock shaft. You need to break off these shims. You have a thinner one and a thicker one. Again, just make sure there's no burrs on them. If there is, clean them up. So this is the order that the seals go into the top of the shock body. Now, it recommends you oil these, and that is an important part, but I am actually going to use some more of this green associated slime, which I find better. Just a small amount. There isn't a lot left in this. Small amount on there, and we'll put the first one of those in. And we've got the small washer. Make sure that's pushed home nicely. We've then got the big washer, and we will put some green slime on that as well. Now this is a stepped, the top washer is a stepped washer. And the stepped part goes up. So it sits on there like that. In fact, it actually goes in, it's easier, just looking at the instructions, easier to put it in the top of your screw-on cap. And you can see it just sits in there like that. Before we put that on, we need to put the O-ring sealing on. The sealing O-ring on. Be careful because you've got 3 different size O-rings for these. I'll show you where the other 2 go in a minute. You've got some bigger ones there. That then slides over the thread of the body, and it sits down in there like that. And then we can just screw this on. Make sure you don't get it cross-threaded because these are very fine threads. Doesn't need to be stupidly tight, just a finger tight, and that's pretty much the main part of the shock body done. The last bit is we're going to put the shock adjuster collar on. This little O-ring just sits inside the ring to give it some sort of friction so it doesn't move around on its own, and I recommend just putting a small amount of oil on this when you thread it onto the shock body. And what I do, I just go a couple of turns backwards to find the thread. No, it's not got it. So this is a very fine thread, this is, so you need to make sure that you don't get this on cross-threaded. There we go, you'll feel it go, and then you just turn that around to wherever it needs to go, and then just wipe off the excess oil on there. So there is our shock body and shock piston done. And the next job, this is probably nice critical. You've got to pass the shaft through the shock body. Now this is where you can end up tearing those little small O-rings. So this is where we'll pass that through. I've put some of this green slime on the end of the shock shaft. And what you do is when you put it through, you twist it. Once it comes out the other end there, twist it through. Don't push it through, and then you'll feel it go through, and that should feel nice and smooth. In this setup, you can put downstock shims in the middle there to limit the travel. They don't recommend to start with, so we're not going to bother on that. The next task is to put the ball joint bottom on. I've got some shock pliers here to hold that so it doesn't mark it. If you haven't got shock pliers, you can use side cutters or something like that, just to hold it very near the thread there. You mustn't damage this part of the thread. The beauty of having shock pliers is they're soft, so they don't damage the shock shaft. Once we get that started, we can then get that on the shock shaft. Got the bottom ball joint mount for the shock on there, and you need to make sure you measure this length. Your manual will give you an exact length that needs to be, and that is critical for your performance of your car. It's 29mm for the Xray in this particular configuration. I've measured that with a set of calipers. The last job is to put the sealing O-ring into the top of the shock cap. Then we are ready to fill it with oil. So we're building this up as kit. Kit recommends 450 in the rear, so we will just do that. Fill it all the way to the top. Switch, come to the top. Then move your piston up and down a few times. Be careful, don't do it too fast. And you'll see those air bubbles starting to appear. So move it up 5 or 6 times. And then I'm going to leave that to sit for a few minutes for those air bubbles to rise. If you have a shock pump, you can put them in a shock pump and do that much quicker, which is what we'd normally do at the track. But we'll leave that for the air bubbles to rise, and we'll come back in a second, or in a few minutes. So we've let this oil settle for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes. In the meantime, I've actually built the rest of the shocks up. So we've now got the process of actually bleeding the shocks. So we'll come back and we'll take the one we started with, which is the rear. So the first job is make sure your O-ring is in the cap, and we just screw on the lid or the top link. And what you might find is you need to just top the oil up. When the bubbles come out, it does sometimes reduce the level a little bit. Now this bit potentially can get messy, so you'll need some cloth. So if we just push up, you see the oil starts to come out. Push the shock shaft all the way up. And then with that held all the way up, like that, we insert this screw into there. So we've inserted that screw all the way into there and just cleaned up the shock itself. So we leave that all the way in. Now what the Xray manual recommends you then do is move the shock up and down 6 times. Now everyone might have a slightly different bleed process, but we're going to do what actually the Xray recommends. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then with it in the open position, we remove this screw. And then push this back up, and you'll see we'll get more oil come out. Put the screw back in, and there we have one shock bled as per the Xray manual, and we have what they class as no rebound, so the piston doesn't come out any distance when you push it all the way in. Give it a good clean up. Make sure there's no oil around any of these parts, because obviously all the dirt and grit and everything will stick to that. And I'm just going to now build the other 3 up, and then we'll just do the last bit of putting the mounts on it. So here we are, just going to mount the shock absorbers to the car. It's pretty straightforward. Just need to make sure you get the orientation of these eccentric balls correctly on the front and back. So I'll just show you one of each. So for the front, it says standard setting is 3 holes from the outside. Mount this in, you've got a hex, it's actually a 7mm hex, that's part of the mount. So we put that in 3 holes from the outside. Tightened up on there. And then the shock absorbers go on, they mount with this part. You see the shoulder to the outside. That goes on there like that. then we just use a nylock nut on there to tighten that up. Make sure that still moves freely once you've got it tightened up. And so here we have the bottom mounting, and if you can see, the larger part of the eccentric ball goes to the front of the car, and I'm going to mount mine on the inner hole, which is a recommended starting point. And again, that just needs to be snugged up. So we've snugged up that bolt. Make sure you get the right length size bolt in there. That's a 22mm in there, and in this stage of the build for the XB2 there is quite a few longish bolts, and if you put too longer one in there, it'll cause you problems. So that's the front. On the rear, same principle. So on the rear we will mount second hole out. Similar scenario, just to do the bolt up. Again, shoulder goes to the outside. And we'll just nip up that bolt. On the bottom, 14mm bolt. For the carpet setting, the lip of the ball goes to the back of the car. For the dirt setting, it goes the other way around because of your differing sets of wishbones. And we just use the 14mm bolt just to tighten that up. There we have all the shocks mounted. We've done both sides now. So just make sure you get these eccentrics, that's the main thing too, the eccentric ball joints at the bottom in the right way round. Otherwise you'll have different suspension geometry and it won't work as well. And again, make sure you get the larger black part of the flange to the outside so the shocks don't come off. So that is the car almost done. We've just got a few finishing parts to do on the chassis, and that'll be done in the next video. Thanks for watching. So we've just got the finishing touches to the car now. We've got the battery mount, the wing mount, servo, and the waterfall for the rear of the chassis. So we'll start with the servo mount. First things first, you've got to just put these little grub screw into these two ball joints to nip them up so they're completely tight together. It's not a turnbuckle, they just go up together. And the way I found to do that is to get a 1.5mm driver, put it halfway in to one of the ball sockets, and then just nip the other one up. And they have to be at 90 degrees like that. Then for the carpet version we have a 10mm ball stud to go on there. So we pop that in there, and for this side we actually have just a ball stud. A screw actually goes into this. So we'll use our shock pliers, just pop that in there like that, and then there's no damage to either the items. Now you get servo horns with these, but I'm actually not going to put one of them on. I'm actually going to put an alloy one of them on because I've had problems with plastic ones in the past. So all I'm going to do is just screw this up and show you what spacers. You have two little spacers on here. These are the smaller diameter ones. Sorry, it has to go on that way around. Sorry, these are the larger diameter ones. It has the conical washer on there to give clearance on that ball stud. So we'll just screw that in there, and normally you would have a horn that would sit on there, which would then connect to your servo. So that is then your servo assembly ready, or your servo link ready to go into the car. So to mount this onto the car, we've got more spacers to go on here. These are the slightly smaller diameter than the ones we've got on that part. So you've got a thin one and a small one. Now with a 2mm, it then has to go, I don't know if you can see, it actually has to go into that hole there for the carpet spec. The dirt spec goes into there, I believe, and the carpet one goes into here. It's a little bit fiddly, so I might have to do this off camera. If you can see, we've actually now got that in that hole there. Basically it gives it different steering geometry to the dirt, which would then go in that hole there. We'll see how that all lines up when we put the servo in the car. Servo mounts, they come with standard plastic ones. I'll probably put some alloy ones of these on, as I do have some, but we'll just screw these into the car. You've got different positions for them to go depending on the size of servo. So we've got the servo horns, and the servo would normally mount in there. You can get spacers to space this off, and obviously use these holes to get the right alignment for your servo linkages. The next item we're going to mount is the waterfall, which braces the gearbox to the chassis. And first step we need to do is to put this ball into our... And we just use some shock pliers there and make sure that feels free. That then slides into the recess on the gearbox, and with a 16mm bolt, nip that up. Now when you do this up, you don't want to over tighten this because it will squash the gearbox halves. Just so that head is flush with that part there, and feel that's nice and tight, but you can see that head is just flush with that. We can then put on the bottom part of the waterfall. It's contoured, so this goes towards the motor. You've got two positions here. In this instance, it goes in the back position, or the one nearest to the front of the car, and two 8mm countersunks go in the bottom here. So we've got those screws in, and as I said, the back holes are actually for when you have the dirt spec car, because it puts a bit of a more of a weight balance to the rear of the car. Then that bit just clips onto there, and two 10mm bolts hold this into there. So we just nip those up, and that is your waterfall in place. Now the battery retaining brackets, you need to make sure you get these in the right way around. They've got dots on them. Make sure the dots are orientated the same way, so you need to put them in that way. If you get it round like that, then your batteries will be, they don't line up quite right. They will basically be sitting like that, so that's not the way to do it. So you need to make sure they're lined up the right way around. First step is just to put one of these little grub screws in the front hole there. For this setting, or for the initial setting, I'm going to put dots to the rear and use the most rearward battery option. Basically, you put the grub screw on the third dot. You can always adjust the height of that so it's almost flush with the top of your brace. You then have the battery tabs. Now it depends on whether you're using low profile lipos or normal size, because you'll need these to snug down. So initially I'm just going to wind these through the battery retainer. So we've just made those two items up. We've just put the nuts on loosely to start with. This is a small burr on that, which we will just remove. But then you screw these gently into the middle hole there, and you need to adjust this height here. You see that spinning round? You need to adjust that height so it holds your batteries in snug. So I can't do that until I've actually got the lipos to go in the car, but we'll put them in so you can see how that works. And then what you need to do is tighten down this nut. So you just tighten these down with a little 5.5mm spanner to keep that tight, and then you just turn these round to keep your lipos in place. And so there we have our car complete. Just got to put the radio gear in it, and it's going to be good to go. Obviously got to put the body shell on, but that is it. That is it. Good to go. So thanks for watching these. Hope they've been some interest, and please do subscribe to the channel.